Resident Evil 4. Famously known for not having bingo.
Bingo?
It's one of Capcom's most successful series.
A lot of money.
Resident Evil is a long-running survival horror franchise known for being one of the greats of the horror genre. Until it wasn't.
I've sent my right hand to dispose of you.
Your right hand comes off?
Why don't I introduce you to it? It should keep you busy.
Can't remember the name, huh? A senior moment, perhaps.
Oh,
Resident Evil has definitely gone through many different evolutions in terms of gameplay. I personally call them security camera, shoulder, the Winter's View, and the remake style. Security camera is obviously what it sounds like. The camera's in a fixed angle, and just like a security camera, you know? And shoulder is obviously what it sounds like as well, as in it's over the shoulder. Wow, whoop-de-doo. In Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8, you play as Ethan Winters, in which you are in first person. It kinda makes sense, you know? And the remake style is just used for all the modern remakes, as in, it's over the shoulder, but this time you can do a full 360. Ooh, engaging gameplay. Unfortunately, we aren't here to talk about cameras or how cool Leon can dress. Yes, I know that's kinda sad to hear. Today, we're talking about the development of Resident Evil 4. Today, we'll be going through the frankly exhausting development period that these people had to go through, and including all the versions that were made during the process. And also including every single bump in the road and asking the question, why did this take so long?
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
I feel like before we start, we really have to talk about everything that happened before Resident Evil 4.
I'm sure you boys didn't just tag along so we could sing Kumbaya together at some Boy Scout bonfire. Then again, maybe you did.
The success of Resident Evil 2 was huge. So huge in fact that they started working on the third game very quickly after the second game's release. In 1999, Shinji Mikami, series producer, gave his fellow teammate at Capcom, Hideki Kamiya, full control over the series. At the time, Resident Evil was Capcom's most successful franchise, so the stress was real. The game was set for release on the then upcoming PlayStation 2, but they didn't want people like Square Enix to overtake them in the horror space during the gap between then and the PS2 release, so they decided to release some spin-off games during the time to just keep fans' interest, you know? They didn't really do that good of a job, but that doesn't really matter. One spin-off they were cooking was a game called Resident Evil 1.9, a game that takes place one day before the events of Resident Evil 2, and it used about the same technology as Resident Evil 2. Great name, by the way. They eventually went ahead and instead of calling it Resident Evil 1.9, changed it to Resident Evil Nemesis because, well, the big bad guy's name is Nemesis, so it's gotta be in the title. However, a couple months before the release of the game, Yoshiki Okamoto, the then supervisor of the series for the time, came up to Resident Evil producer Shinji Mikami and Resident Evil Nemesis director Kazumuro Aoyama, saying that they needed a big moneymaker for 1999. Okamoto said that they needed to change the name from Resident Evil Nemesis to Resident Evil 3. The game was designed to be a short game compared to the rest of the series, so both Mikami and Aoyama were very hesitant. They weren't sure people were going to like it that much for being so different. Either way, it was a command, they had to do it. But this means Kamiya was no longer working on the third entry, but instead skipping a beat and working on the fourth. Management had given the orders that RE4 should be, quote-unquote, edgier, cooler, and more awesome than any entry that came before it. Kamiya wanted a darker goth feeling, and for that they actually took research trips to Europe to receive reference material to use. The earliest build we know of is where Leon Kennedy investigates an old castle owned by Oswald Spencer. It was quickly dropped, however, as Kamiya said that they need to keep the series fresh, so they needed new characters and story, something new. He also wanted a badass hero to emphasize how cool it would be. Leon wasn't really that cool until RE4 released. Just look at this.
Don't you know when it's time to throw in the towel? Where's the satisfying sound of one's impalement?
Don't fall for this old trick.
And now, look at this. So the idea of using Leon was then dropped for a cooler hero by the name of Tony, who had superhuman abilities and biotech upgrades to his body which would have been used to kill enemies in flashy ways. Kamiya wanted two things to happen if they were to make a sequel that was supposed to be new. For that, he really wanted the tank controls and fixed camera angles to go. They just couldn't release this new hip title with old boring stuff. It was just kind of indecent. They did well for a while, but then they, DJ Khaled once said,
"In life you have roadblocks."
Sounds more like an alien invasion if you ask me.
The game that Kamiya had created had apparently been way too edgy and badass for their own good. They couldn't release this as a new installment in the Resident Evil series, as it would be way too different for its own good. Kamiya was told that he can do whatever he wanted, and that it didn't even have to be primarily horror. Lots of stuff was heavily related to Resident Evil, but this game's gameplay was way too action-oriented. People received well to this, however, so Kamiya decided to start shipping it out as its own new franchise, Devil May Cry. Despite the setback, it offered a new opportunity for the team. With there being no mainline entry at the time, Okamoto and Mikami tried to get a good deal with one of the big gaming companies for the Resident Evil game's exclusivity on one of their consoles. With Resident Evil being Capcom's biggest success since Street Fighter II, they had a feeling that someone would try to get those rights. A leading cause of this decision was that Mikami was unsure about Sony's approach on game development, with DVDs falling outside the realm of gaming, and they found the GameCube's smaller discs being more intriguing. But they were still curious on how Sony's competitors would react to having a slice of that sweet, sweet Resident Evil cake. So around the tail end of 2000, Mikami met up with representatives from both Microsoft and Nintendo, with the meeting from Microsoft not going well. Translators were very unprepared for Mikami's questions, so Mikami just got up and left. After a while, Microsoft realized that they messed up big time and attempted to get in contact with Capcom to reschedule a meeting to try again. But that ship was already sailed, as Resident Evil was now a Nintendo exclusive. Once the deal was official, Sony Interactive President Ken Kutaragi invited Capcom's higher-ups to a very awkward dinner, saying that Capcom betrayed Sony, despite obviously not being owned by Sony in terms of contracts or deals. Capcom assured them not to worry, as releasing games on the PS2 was still a major priority, with more games being released on there than the Xbox or GameCube combined.
Hasta luego.
With everything set in place, Mikami got started on a new project, remaking the game that started it all, Resident Evil, exclusively for the GameCube. He also needed to make a team to restart RE4's development. Hiroshi Shibata, Nemesis background designer, was chosen to be transferred over, as well as Sugimura, the writer of RE2, and Kawamura, the writer for Resident Evil 3. This was very similar to the first ever version, with Leon having to sneak into a dark castle owned by, wouldn't you know it, Oswald Spencer, and getting possessed in the process. This would cause some sort of power to be in his left hand, but what the power is unknown. They eventually showed the trailer at Capcom's 5 2002, and Mikami went on to declare that RE4 would still represent a big change for the franchise. This iteration was known as the Fog version, due to this weird black fog that would attempt to attack Leon in the trailer. The reason this build got cancelled could be up to interpretation, however, as there is no concrete reason on why they left it to die. But the most common answer thought up by fans was that the team was trying to bite off more than they could chew, as rendering the fog would be too much for the GameCube to handle and would eat at the console's memories too quickly. So around 40% completion, just about everything was thrown out. Kawamura then became writer, as Sugimura soon left afterwards to pursue other projects. Now we're at the next project, which we know even less about. This version has Leon trying to survive in an old medieval castle. Oh boy, here we go again. This was codenamed Hookman because Leon fights a guy with a hook for a hand. I honestly couldn't have guessed that. These have the fixed camera from the previous games, but also have the shoulder view when aiming down for a better view, in addition to a laser sight to help accuracy. That's actually kinda cool. This also introduced quicktime events when enemies grab you, so if you want, you could try to wiggle out. Unless you really like to get hit or something. I mean, you do you. There was also the brand new addition of selectable dialogue options, which never came to light unfortunately, which kinda sucks. That would've been kinda funny. During fights or conversations, supposedly Leon could say certain lines and just change some events. Come on, we want to hear some funny one-liners. This came at the quirk of having hallucinations. Leon would fight real enemies but also have hallucinations after being injected with a virus. What the virus was though is also unclear. To do the hallucinations, they had to make 2 different versions of every room. You can probably see why this didn't come to reality. The power of the GameCube could definitely not handle both the real world and hallucination world. It was just too much to switch from the fly to. In an interview, Kawamura said, even if we did have that budget, it was almost impossible to cram all of it into the GameCube's memory. We couldn't even add any monsters. In the same interview, Kawamura said that he wanted to make the scariest entry in the series, not using science or reason, just to boost it. He also wanted to stick to Mikami's one rule, which is to scare the player. That's the main goal of Resident Evil for him. This entire version, like I said before, it was way too much for the console to handle, so which they threw to the trash. The last prototype they worked on is actually the least we know about, being codenamed Resident Evil Zombie. Ooh. This is just bringing back the zombie concept again, no big deal. In this version, however, there was a concept for the Dobermen, which were controlled by parasites in which way they would pop out and damage you. These were most likely used in the final version, wink wink.
Just because you killed my small-time subordinate.
Sadler, You're small time.
The RE Zombies project was quickly abandoned, and Mikami was done. 3 cancellations, years of development, fans were waiting so long. He just had to do it. He couldn't cancel the project. Just one more go. Becoming a GameCube exclusive also kinda damaged this. Resident Evil Remake sold less than 1.5 million, but comparing that to RE2, which made 4.9, and RE3, that made 3.5 million, moving to the GameCube definitely doomed this project in terms of sales. I felt ashamed for putting the other staff through this. It was disappointing and discouraging. I still think that the idea was brilliant, but I didn't have enough skill or guts to put the plan into action. I don't know if I could have done anything to prevent that occurrence though. I just wanted to make a scary Biohazard game, said Kawamura to Eurogamer. Kawamura later packing his bags and leaving the project, Mikami didn't want to waste any time whatsoever, so he famously wrote the script in just under 3 weeks, as he wanted the focus to be on gameplay and not the story. To change the formula enough to make this a one-of-a-kind experience, Mikami ignored his own rule, scaring the player as a top priority. He wanted the gameplay to be so fun that people would forgive them for taking so long. The first thing that they did was take the shoulder combat angle from the Hookman build and make that the default for the entire game. This game kind of revolutionized the whole shoulder view thing, as God of War and Dead Space and other games like that started to stick with that for a while. Mikami didn't even mean for it to be a benchmark, he just thought it felt natural. The team were confused about working on the game, worried that people would be upset that it would be different and how much has changed since the previous entries. It was told that some employees just got flat out depressed working on RE4, and just wanted to work on something else entirely. To add more emphasis on the new camera and environment was the addition of more enemies, melee moves, and of course, the Merchant. Those European trips years ago really paid off, as they made the entire game take place in Spain of all places, instead of America. Thankfully, when they showed it off in 2004, gamers and critics alike loved it. Of course, there were 1 or 2 people who were hesitant, but the general consensus was overall positive. They showed it off more and more until its eventual release in 2005.
Mission accomplished. Right, Leon?
Not quite. I still have to get you home safe.
Reviews were positive, way more positive than the team could ever think. 10 out of 10s across the board from both gamers and critics alike. There is one thing, however, that we still need to talk about. Capcom announced later that year that due to a change in marketing and sales, Resident Evil 4 was going to release on the PlayStation 2. Yes, even after Mikami famously said that you'll see him dead before Resident Evil 4 releases on other consoles, which is a real quote by the way. This was a suggestion from Capcom shareholders who were worried that Resident Evil 4 would get poor sales unless they ported to the very popular PlayStation 2, and that they needed the money after the 6 years of making pretty much zero progress. It was also backed up by Resident Evil Zero's and Resident Evil Remake's poor sales. The team was worried about bringing it over to other consoles, as it was made from the ground up with the GameCube in mind the entire time. Even if they wanted to, it would be significantly harder to port it because they use specific code that only the GameCube uses. Also, if there was any problem, Mikami couldn't help because he just left the project after the final game was released. He even contemplated leaving Capcom entirely because he was just so fed up with the higher-ups wanting to be on other consoles.
Oh my goodness!
Employees working on the port had a tough time. Coding was difficult, textures were discolored and stretching, lighting was somehow worse, even sound was worse. Cutscenes had to become pre-recorded on PS2, unlike the GameCube which ran it in real time, which could display alt costumes. The team wanted to record multiple of each cutscene to compensate for that, but ultimately they chose against it because that would probably require another disc to run it. To kind of balance this out, they added a new weapon, costumes, and the brand new Separate Ways mode, which shows what Ada did during Leon's wacky adventure in Spain, which is pretty neat. And also because this is only on the PS2, each cutscene was in buttery smooth 360p, which means on the modern ports, this is what it looks like.
All for Umbrella's sake. Umbrella? Almost let it slip. Enough talk. Die, comrade!
While releasing it was tricky, the PS2 sales more than made up for the entire project altogether, with the GameCube only selling 19 million by 2005 and the PS2 selling a little over 100 million by 2005. It's safe to say that they made the right choice. Resident Evil 4 sold 2.3 million in just a couple months on the PlayStation 2 alone, while by 2023, Capcom revealed every single version combined sold 12.3 million copies.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
After 17 years, we too have gained a lot of knowledge about making games. We're now able to make games that are enjoyed on both a deeper and broader level, even when it comes to elements like controls and storytelling. We thought that adding this knowledge to Resident Evil 4 would make it a more enjoyable title. That's why we decided to tackle Resident Evil 4 with the mindset of, even if it's a difficult project, let's see if we can do it, says Yoshiaki Hayashi to IGN, the lead cinematic designer of the original Resident Evil 4.
She's gonna hurt yourself.
Well, I wanted to go home, but Ashley just had to see this castle first.
June 2nd, 2022 was the day in which a funny little game was revealed, Resident Evil 4 Remake, which came out less than a year later. Following the Resident Evil 2 remake in 2019 and the Resident Evil 3 remake in 2020, the Resident Evil 4 remake follows the same tradition of making a more intense reimagining of their respective games, except for 3, in which case it was just really bad. The remake takes a much more serious take to fit the Resident Evil 2 remake, but don't be fooled because this game still has some fine funny moments.
Shit! Give the brake!
This game also looks very gorgeous. No wonder Capcom uses the Resident Evil engine for literally everything. I know I can't really prove that in this because I downloaded this video at 480p, but I think you still get the point. And because this game isn't even a year old yet, we don't know much of the development, so instead I'm going to be talking about things they added. Starting off with the new crafting. It's now expanded. In the original you can only really craft stuff like herb mixtures or combined treasures, but now you can craft ammo and grenades, stuff that you can only do in a small amount of Resident Evil titles. Treasures were also added upon in some cool ways. Some treasures can be sold at the same price, but during the game you can pick up gemstones that you can place in some treasures to increase the selling price to the merchant. Speaking of the merchant, let's talk about the new quests you can do. These are from killing a couple rats in an area to egging a painting or beating a side boss. If you complete these quests, you get spinels. Spinels were in the original game, but were just a very common treasure you could find to make a small amount of cash. In the remake, however, spinels have a new role, that being a new form of currency. There's a new section in the shop dedicated to trading spinels for items, which otherwise can't be bought with usual money. These things are usually weapon attachments, new attaché cases, or treasure maps. Some new weapons are here as well. A new submachine gun and a brand new assault rifle, expensive to make ammo for but packs an incredible punch if you land your shots. Brand new bolt thrower is here, which is a silent weapon. Enemies won't be alerted when shooting this weapon. It's weak, but with the addition of attachable mines, it adds a whole new perspective on things. You can now parry using knives, something that hasn't even been seen in the series before, and you can also sneak behind enemies to instantly kill them, or at least damage them intensely. Knives also have durability now. You collect them during the game and they break over time, but you also have a permanent knife that's always on you. It does break and it has to be repaired at the merchant, but it could also be upgraded to deal major damage or break slower. Parries can be performed by pressing the knife button if an enemy is about to collide with you with a weapon. Half the time they stumble back and you can successfully kick them over, other times they try to catch you off guard by going for another quick attack. I find it really funny that you can parry the chainsaw of all things. Characters like Ashley and Luis are so much better now, especially Ashley. Luis appears so much more and has these really cool moments. That newly improved minecart section, which was probably my least favorite thing in the original game, was probably my favorite thing in the entire remake. It's just so fun in the remake, especially with Luis now being there and having banter between you and him. Now let's get to Ashley. Probably one of my favorite changes in the entire remake, period. In the original, she was treated more as a damsel in distress and as a second health bar to manage. She wasn't that annoying as people said, but yeah, she could be a pain at times. No longer in the remake is she a big nuisance. Instead of having a health bar to manage, she now just falls to the floor if she gets attacked. You do have to pick her up again, but it has such a big improvement instead of just feeding her plants every 5 seconds. She's also no longer a one-note character. During the game, she banters with Leon about stuff that's happening, or just anything that's fun.
Hey, Leon, there's some armor. Bet you could use it like a bulletproof vest.
Little old-fashioned for my taste.
Too bad. I think you'd look pretty dashing.
If you decide to go down to the shooting range while Luis or Ashley are in your party, they congratulate you for hitting the targets, or say something snooty if you shoot the wrong target. Or they just have some banter.
That was awesome! Are you serious?
Speaking of the shooting range, oh my god, they had a field day making that song.
You've been waiting for it! A flood of targets! Ha! Now the party's getting double kill! Beautiful! Superb shot! And that's the game!
Story of my life.
Resident Evil 4 stands as a testament to Capcom's biggest successes. It only took 6 years, 3 different versions, and 1 version that turned into a whole series to accomplish that. Renovated by Mikami, Resident Evil changed forever. Its legacy stands as one of the greats of gaming and a symbol of both evolution and adaptation within game development. The fact that it was released on pretty much every console following the GameCube proves that the gameplay, engaging mechanics, and narrative were more than enough for gamers to love it. And that is the history of Resident Evil 4.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?